Okay, let's talk about the media, because you can talk about, we can talk ourselves into a Trump-style fidget spinner, and it's not going to get us anywhere. So the media, he drove this truck through it. I do think it's great. I think it's helped voices like yours, like what we're doing here, like many other people, who are not promising all the answers, but at least promising discussions and some lines of thought that maybe weren't getting out there in the mainstream. Do you think that there is a risk in that too? That we are just going to filter ourselves into oblivion to the point where instead of having 3 news channels, we're now going to have a gajillion of them, and we're all going to hate each other for a zillion new reasons that we didn't even realize?
Definitely. There's a definite moral hazard here. I mean, a free, you know, as these liars in our press keep saying, a free press is important to a free society. And you do want, I mean, another thing that's working well under Trump is that that the press is attacking the people in power instead of what they did during the Obama administration, where they kept their hands over their eyes and said, oh, look, he's scandal free.
Right. You know? I would argue there's a little bit of an overcorrection happening.
An overcorrection, no question about it. But that's because they're so corrupt. I mean, that's why. So I do believe in I can't remember the word, but a press that basically stands up to power. I do believe in a free press. We don't have a free press. We have a press that has been corrupted beyond its purposes. And that doesn't mean there are no good reporters. That means that a good reporter on the New York Times is basically doing the wrong thing, because he's giving credence and credibility to a sophomoric left-wing college magazine. And with his...
Can you give an example of that? Because that's the type of thing. So I attack CNN all the time.
Right.
I've seen some bad stuff lately out of the New York Times, where the headline leads you one way, and then when you read it, it really isn't what it said. They've been doing a lot of corrections lately, which usually no one reads the corrections, so you never see any of that. But when I do attack the New York Times, people give me more shit. Like CNN, it's like everyone's in on the joke now. Okay, fine. But New York Times, it's a little bit different. So when you describe it as a sophomore...
I mean, if you read their op-ed page, which I now call Knucklehead Row, you know, if you read their op-ed page, it really is like a bunch of 8-year-old girls in a room where a mouse has gotten loose. It's like all screaming and yelling, everybody running around in hysterics. And that's really unfair to 8-year-old girls. and if you read, I mean, just yesterday they ran a story, Donald Trump Jr. met with a Russian lawyer and all this. Who cares? I mean, who cares? Donald Trump Jr. met with a Russian lawyer to get because he thought she had information on the opposition, and everybody, you know, faints, and who cares?
I saw celebrities, well-known people saying, "This is it. This is the collusion we've been looking for."
It's a page 30 story.
It's called opposition research. Everyone does this. Do you think Hillary didn't meet with people to see if they had information on Trump?
And only in an organization where no one is sitting next to you who says, "Dude, that's not a story. That's a page 30 story." Only in a place where everybody thinks we've found the smoking gun can you make a fool of yourself like that. You know, in other words, you want somebody to say to you, you know, like, I know you're a conservative, but there is something to not letting people starve to death in the streets. You go, oh yeah, I forgot about, you know, you know, and the opposite is true. You know, yeah, I know you're a left-winger, but everybody does oppo research, and you know, the fact that she was from Russia doesn't mean a thing. You know.
And by the way, as far as I know, he didn't buy anything from her or take anything from her.
It was a ruse to get him to talk about this ruling, you know, that limits the way they can use banks and all this stuff. You know, we've been listening to this stupid story for 6 months, this Russian story. It is not a story. I mean, it's just not. And even the Russian meddling with the election, which I believe happened, is kind of like finding a spy. You know, we go, oh my goodness, there's a spy. Who would ever spy on a, you know, like, you know, can we bring our spies back for a couple, you know, that's what this is like. We do it to them and all this, and they do it to us. So the New York Times has become, it's dishonest. They use good reporters and good reporting to tell a dishonest story. And the fact that they think that they even can conceive of the idea that they're not a leftist rag shows you how far gone they are. I mean, that they cannot, you know, take it just any day, pick up the Wall Street Journal and pick up the New York Times. And the Wall Street Journal, you're talking to an adult. The New York Times, you're talking to a child.
Well, it's interesting that you made a point of saying the op-ed pages too, because obviously you expect opinion on op-ed page, so that's separate than the editorial side. But their op-ed page, the reaction to some of the things that they're doing has gone insane. So they brought Bret Stephens from the Wall Street Journal. He writes that one piece basically just about skepticism. Didn't even really say he doesn't believe in climate change. I think he may have even said the opposite. But then there were immediately people demanding he be fired and all of this crazy craziness just for having an alternate opinion on their op-ed page. But the one that I thought was more interesting, did you see the one a couple weeks ago about Brett Weinstein from Evergreen State? And it was all about campus free speech, but basically the thrust of it at the end was, we as liberals better start caring about this because it's coming for us.
Right.
And I thought, what an odd admission. You're now admitting that you didn't care about free speech because it was coming against the other people.
Right.
Now it's finally turning on a guy who's left, super progressive. So now we better start caring. Like, that was a strange admission. It was nice. It was refreshing, I suppose.
It is, but I mean, I think the New York Times has just gone so far down this hole that an article like that stands out. You know, when you read an article like that in the Times, you go like, wow, even in the New York Times, they're now for free speech. You know, that's not good. You know, like the New York Times should be for free speech every day, for everyone, every day. The New York Times should have conservatives on the desks where the news decisions are being made. You know, the Wall Street Journal is anti-Trump in its news pages, sometimes unfairly, I think, but not crazily. You know, they have people obviously correcting their opinions. You know, there comes a time when the level of corruption gets so bad that audacity becomes a kind of a brag. So you see this in governments all the time. You see it in Illinois, places like Chicago and things like this, where, remember the Boss Tweed and the little tin box and all this stuff? Yeah, I put the money in a little tin box. that audacious corruption comes from a sense that we are so corrupt that no one can touch us, okay? When you put George Stephanopoulos, a Clinton hack, at the top of your news team, he is your news guy, that's a sign that you have become corrupt. Yeah. It's not that he's
that's
not
ABC News.
Yes, that's ABC. Yeah. It's not that he's not a nice man or whatever he is. He's a guy who once said to Hillary, "I love you, Hillary." He can have a role in your news department, but he should not be running your news department. The guy at CBS who just looks like Ted Baxter to me, you know, the member from the
I remember Ted Baxter.
Right? What's his name? Scott Pelley.
Yeah,
you know, who made decisions so biased during the Obama administration that his own reporters didn't want their stories going on his air because they didn't want to do what I was talking about, was serve a biased report. This corruption has become so manifest and so absurd that to see it taken down is a beautiful thing. But you're right, we need to replace it with something of value. We need to replace it with something that works.
So is that why they're hitting back so hard? So the CNN thing that happened last week with this threat to dox this person who did a perfectly legal thing. It is legal to make memes. By the way, he didn't make it for Trump. However it got to Trump, and it sounds like it was actually a slightly altered version. Right. We don't know how it is, but there are millions of people making memes on the internet as we sit here right this second. It wasn't just that they were threatening to dox this guy for doing something illegal. It was the line after that where they said he's agreed not to do this offensive blah, blah, blah again, as if they're the church or his parents or something. So to me, that was the scarier thing, not the threat of the dox, which of course is wrong, but the threat that they were tacitly saying or implicitly saying to everybody else, we're watching you too, and we're going to come for all of you.
Well, you know,
and then the internet turned on them in a beautiful fashion.
Right, but it was only the follow-up and the completion of the logic that went after Joe the plumber. And of course the right mishandled that by elevating Joe the plumber to some kind of commentator because he had been attacked. But remember, Joe the plumber went out and asked the question of a political candidate, and they went after the guy who asked the question.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is how corrupt they've become. And they are thuggish, and this is all of them. I mean, I'm talking about the networks, I'm talking about the Times, I'm talking about WAPO, and I'm talking about CNN, which is in some ways the least of them because it's just a small operation that would vanish like that if people cut their cable cords, you know?
Right. What's that thing they say that if they would get CNN out of airports, it would lose like...
It would lose all of its viewers.
Yeah.
You know, it's all of these guys, and it hasn't even occurred to one of them, not one of them has said, well, you know, Trump is being a jerk, and Trump is not, it's not fair what he does, and it's really wrong when he attacks our reporter in terms of her face or whatever, you know, like, but he has a point. You know, we need to reform our industry. There's a reason that the people believe Donald Trump more than they believe us. There's a reason that people hate us so much.
So it really is that they've just been drunk on power for these last, whatever it is, 30 years. They've been drunk on power for so long, and now they finally have someone throwing it in their face. And now the actual people are rising up against them too. That, you know, I saw You saw probably Chris Cuomo, who of course his brother is the mayor, or is the governor of
he's
New
another
York.
one. He's
his
another
father
yeah.
was the governor of New York.
And he's an idiot. He's like Fredo from the Cuomo family.
He really, I mean, every time you see the guy, he's just another, just
it's embarrassing.
Yeah. But he tweeted something about, these hateful memes and should we release the information because the guys tweeted some other racist stuff and all that. And then he ended up deleting it. But I retweeted him and I said, would you say that a meme or a GIF is worse than Linda Sarsour calling for jihad? Now, we talked about it briefly before we started, but regardless of whether she meant her own personal jihad, but she's talking about the white supremacists and Islamophobes in the White House. And everyone knows if you're using that word, you're trying to gin up a certain something. And my tweet got way more retweets and everything than any of his do. He has 1 million followers and almost no interaction, which also tells you a little something. But I bring this up because it's like, of course he doesn't respond, because they think they're beholden to nobody too. Where it's like, we actually are beholden to our audience.
When I was a newspaperman, in a small town with a very powerful and somewhat corrupt sheriff. So it was like out of a movie, and I would badger the guy. And I remember saying to one, I had some sources in the department, and I remember saying to one of them, look, we both work for the people. And he turned around and he said, I work for the people, you work for a corporation. And I thought, my God, he's right. The minute he said it, I thought, oh, that's true, that's true. They don't understand that they're just mouthpieces for big corporations which love big government because big government hurts the little guy. That's all they're doing. They're just standing up for these powerful corporations in the name of all the leftist, bywords and all this stuff. They really have lost any real sense of themselves, and it's pitiful to watch in some ways, but it is good to see it getting exposed. And what I would like to see on the right, I feel on the right we have a lot of really good people like you and me and Ben and all these people expressing opinions. But I
don't consider myself part of the right, by the way.
You're
I'm
kind of moving into libertarian.
Yeah, I would say, I'm still a liberal, which is a fine line between that and a libertarian. But yes, I hate to even pause you there to say that, but I know a certain amount of people start screaming at me. But I'm more than happy to talk to all of you guys.
But I say it all the time that I'm a conservative because I'm a liberal.
Yeah. All right, so I'll just use the reverse on that. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that I would like to see us start to gather information. And that's expensive, and you need people to back you, and you need it to somehow make it profitable. But we need to start sending people to the hotspots, because for me to get the facts, I have to go to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and CNN and all these places because they hire reporters. And opinions are great and insights are great, and there is now, because the press is so corrupt, there is an actual need for people like us to say, they're telling you the facts mean this, but the facts actually might mean this, That is an actual profession now. It's a real profession that needs to be done. But I would like to see the right go after, have people in Iraq, have people in, in the hotspots of the world, have people in Washington, D.C. The best news program on television is Bret Baier's Special Report, because they gather news and because they're fair. Even though even though they tilt to the right, they're very fair about what they cover.
Are you shocked by the breadth of it? Just sort of the amount of activists masquerading as journalists? Yeah. Because that's what I think they are, truly. These people are not. I mean, I've seen just some of the recent hit pieces on me. Yeah. And it's like, no matter how much I plead my case or defend myself or show them evidence to the contrary of what some Mother Jones calling me an extremist to the right of Breitbart.
Wow,
really?
Really?
Real doozy.
Yeah.
And it's like, they don't correct anything. They don't care. They know their job is safe. And it's like, forgetting all that, you're not a journalist. Yeah. Like, that's what I tweeted the guy something to that effect. Like, I just want you to admit you're not a journalist. Write what you want, even though I probably had a decent case for libel. Write what you want, but can you admit what you're doing? And it's like that that lack of self-awareness.
I have now been saying this to the right for 10, 15 years about our loss of the culture. And that's what this is. This is the result of our loss of the universities, of our loss of TV stations, women's magazines. Every women's magazine is left-wing. Every comedian on television, every late-night comedian, every single one is a left-winger. Not one woman. And when one of them made a joke was nice to Donald Trump, he was basically pilloried. He had to take
right
it
with
back.
Jimmy Fallon.
Jimmy Fallon, that was the one. I mean, it's hard to tell the difference because they're all the same. They're all exactly the same.
Right.
Everyone. How did we let that happen, and why don't we respond? And I always say to conservatives that telling them about the culture is like trying to explain to my wife when she buys something on sale, it still costs money. And she always looks at me and says, you're a cute guy, and I like you, but I don't know what you're talking about. And that's the way conservatives look at me. How did we get to the point where we have people talking like 100-year-old men going, I don't go to the movies anymore. I just turn on Turner Classic and Doris Day is good enough for, I mean, that's insane. And how do we get to the point where we start making stuff that educates people, not to be right-wingers, but simply to open their minds a little bit?
So I don't know what your feelings are on Milo, but I suspect after hearing you say that, you must at least love much of the movement behind him, right? Because isn't that thing that you're now saying we're winning the culture war back? I mean, he talked about that all the time right here.
That is such a great question. It's a great question because Milo gives me fits. I've only spoken to Milo once. We had a long conversation about video games. When he was on Gamergate.
Yeah.
And I like the man. I got along with him. He has done some stuff that's so vicious, partly to my friend Ben Shapiro, which I resent because he's my friend, and anti-Semitic, and he has given shelter to anti-Semites, which I always feel the minute I see anti-Semitism, it is the canary in the coal mine. That's where evil dwells, basically.
They usually go for the Jews.
They go for the Jews first, and so there's stuff that he's done that I just think is great. And I wish that he would, find himself in a somewhat better place. Because there is such a thing, even though I believe everyone should be allowed to speak, there are some things that when spoken, are reprehensible.
There's consequences for your speech.
That's right. And when I hear him, I don't know, the Jew remarks and the kind of, the kind of hateful, allowing hatefulness to be cute, allowing it to be ironic, saying, I've heard him say, for instance, when our generation is anti-Semitic, they're just being ironical. And I think that's a snake that's going to bite back. I don't really buy into that. And so I like what he's doing. I don't always like the way that he's doing it or what he's doing it in service to. But certainly when he had, what was it called, the Dangerous Faggot Tour? Yeah. I laughed out loud. I thought I want more of those guys. I mean, that was Breitbart and I used to have this conversation all the time. When I first met Breitbart, he kind of enlisted me into the LA right, as he did almost all of us. I said to him, I want to tell you right up front that I'm not going in for this gay stuff, this anti-gay stuff, because I think we're going to lose. I said, we're going to lose, which is no shame, but we're going to lose and be wrong, and that's a shame. Yeah. That's really shameful. And Breitbart said to me, what I want is more patriotic gay porn. And I said, sign me up, brother.
Two straight guys demanding more patriotic straight porn. That's how much you people love the country.
We weren't going to watch it, but we thought it should be there. And so I think that, I have this conversation with people about Milo all the time. I see a good that he is doing. I see dangers in the way he's doing it, and I think you can be too ironical about too much because there is a moral universe, and you do not want to blow yourself through it.
Yeah. Do you think that's kind of the Faustian bargain that you have to play? You're getting what you want, what you've wanted here, and you as a guy that's been through the Hollywood machine too. So you're getting the culture wins that really, if he had, let's say he had done, been a little more careful with his language or not done some of the unnecessary over-the-top stuff or whatever, that it might have shaved some of the good part that you want.
Yeah,
maybe just wouldn't have broke through the same way.
That's kind of what the Trumpian bargain, I would say.
That's a better way to put it.
That only a guy as uncaring about the niceties would have driven his truck into the media the way he did. And I think that, does it come with moral hazards? Yes. Do people have to speak up about those moral hazards and take the flack from the right when they say, oh, you're a cuck and you're all these things? Yes, we have to take that flack. But it has to be done because I think we had reached a tipping point. I hate to use a cliched phrase like that, but I think we had reached a tipping point where we were sounding very much like a communist country, like there was things that you could say that made you persona non grata, that there were opinions you could have, that, you know, the trapdoor, like the James Bond villain, you had to be dropped through the trapdoor. Yeah. I think we were at a dangerous point, and political correctness is a smothering, toxic, evil device for making lying seem like a virtue. And if Donald Trump destroys political correctness, he will have done a great thing. I mean, a great thing. And that moral hazards come along with that, I think we shouldn't forget it. And, you know, a good example of this was when they shut down Shakespeare in the Park the other day. Now, Shakespeare, that was reprehensible to assassinate the president on stage. I really think, you know, as a Shakespeare fan, I think that it was an awful, awful thing to do.
But they would have done the same thing if it was Obama, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
Exactly the same.
But to shut them down and to have my friends, you know, writing that this was a good thing, you know, that's a mistake.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Because now what you're saying, it's okay to fight to say, well, we've got to be as tough as the left, but to say we've got to be as tough as the left for things that the left would approve of, like shutting down free speech, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, and that's why again, the sides are just becoming meaningless and nonsensical.
I think that's a really good observation, because I do think that, this is part of the problem I have with the right now, is I keep saying to them, you know, you're right, they're disturbed because the conservative movement has essentially collapsed. When Trump swept all those guys off the stage the way he did in the primaries, the conservative movement was done for, and my response to that is, fix it. You know, put it back together differently. You know, it's a new world, make a new conservatism. You don't have to get rid of your principles. You don't have to get rid of your big principles, but you might have to get rid of some of the ways those principles express themselves in the world.
Yeah. So that's just realpolitik, right? I mean, it seems to me you're just viewing the world as it is, not as you want it to be. So if you had a guy like Bill Kristol, where it's like he wants that conservative thing to exist again.
Yes.
I don't think you can make that happen, or you certainly can't. It's going to go through several other iterations before it was ever to get back to something like that.
Yeah, no, I'm interested in guys like Henry Olsen, who are basically pointing out that Reagan was kind of an FDR Democrat more than anything else, and he invented kind of modern conservatism. I'm interested in guys who say, look, this is the field of play, and this is where we want to get. See, this is the thing that I know that I notice a lot of commentators don't. I know where I want to get. I want to get to more freedom. I have more freedom now, 6 months after the election of Donald Trump, 7 months after the election of Donald Trump, than I did 8 months ago. No question in my mind. The fact that the EPA can't now rule my sink a waterway and declare that they can now tell me whether I can shave or not, you know, I think that makes me more free. I think Judge
But that being said, Trump may not be great on eminent domain, right? Because he might want this wall to cut through things. You know, who knows where the hell the wall's at now, but I assure you he would have no problem using eminent domain to make it cut through private property.
About it. Yeah, no, there are all these dangers involved. And so I just want to see, is the ball moving in the freedom direction all the time? And right now it is. And, you know, I definitely see moral hazards. I definitely look at a guy, Milo. I mean, he's such a good example, because I look at him and there are things that he does that make me laugh out loud, and I just think, it's wonderful he's here. And then suddenly he'll say something and I'll think, except, you don't want to give credence to hatred and evil. You know, I mean, evil is bigger than irony. Evil will eat irony. You know, and so you want to be careful about that.
I feel that could have been the ending, but I'm gonna ask you one other thing, which is, do you fear perhaps that these forces, which have grown so fat and were so drunk on their own power and all that, now that it's starting to crumble, do you fear that they will hit back on people like you and people like me and whoever in a way that we may not understand yet? In other words, that thing that they did with the Han asshole solo and the GIF or the meme was a warning shot only of the way that they're going to try to treat the people who go against them.
Well, I think we've seen it with these leaks from the intelligence community about Donald Trump did this, and some of these leaks turned out not to be true, but the press was perfectly happy to say sources within the intelligence community, former officials, and you think, well, what does a former official know? Didn't matter. They were putting a front page. That was the front page on the New York Times, the Washington Post. That was the deep state striking back. There's no question about it. They're going to continue to fight. This is a genuine battle. This is a genuine battle for, I hate to say it, but it's a battle for the future. I mean, I think that this global world, which has many good things in it, I think free trade and global communication and all this, also allowed a small group of people to make decisions, unelected people, to make decisions for people who had no way to redress their grievances. And I think that can't be. If we're going to become a global world, then I want America to take it over. But basically, I'm an imperialist in that regard. If the world's going to be global, fine, but everybody's living under the Constitution. That's the way it's going to be. If everybody's not living under the Constitution, and Saudi Arabia doesn't want to live under the Constitution, then I want Saudi Arabia to stay in Saudi Arabia. And I want Saudi Arabians to stay in Saudi Arabia unless they want to come over here to live under the Constitution. So those are the choices.
Right. That's an interesting way to frame it.
Either it's a global world run by the Constitution or America first.
Well, Andrew, a anonymous source on Capitol Hill is telling me right now that this was an excellent interview.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. I hope we can continue the conversation.
I get my anonymous source on Capitol Hill is from Gloria Borger. She's always quoting this anonymous, like, are you talking to the janitor? Like, a source on Capitol Hill? It's anybody. Well, that's what I want people to understand. It's anybody. It's all made up. It's been a pleasure talking to you, as always. And for more on Andrew, check him out on The Andrew Klavan Show. Brilliant name, by the way.
I know. It was amazing. We worked for ages on it.
The Andrew Klavan Show. It's right here on the YouTube.